This is going to be a live broadcast as well. So it's quite interesting to change.
need to press anything again? No, when the lights dim. Choose any of these seats here.
Hello and good evening, everybody, and welcome and thank you for joining us tonight at one of our Women's History Month events with Dame Sheila Hancock. My name is Rebecca Harvey and I'm Councillor and Cabinet Member for Social Inclusion, and working alongside the Mayor, Councillor Emma Apfel, who's also our lead member for Women and Girls. We have been celebrating women for the whole of March. So for all the women out there, I think you should just give yourselves a massive clap. And I think the men should be cheering louder. Thank you. So it's really important that every year we celebrate International Women's Day. And I always wonder, why on earth do we not celebrate the whole month? And in Hammersmith and Fulham, being unique and wonderful, we decided we would. So we've had lots of events. We've had an art exhibition called Through Her Eyes at the Lyric. And we've also put together a women's history timeline of fabulous women that have lived and worked, contributed to the borough. And what you'll see on your tables is that timeline. And we've got amazing women such as Christine Broom, who was the first press photographer. We've got Esther Bruce, Edmona Lewis, and up-to-date modern women working in our borough contributing, such as Rosie Peters. And also, we've got the fabulous Dame Sheila Hancock, who you should all know has established wonderful career working in film, drama, on the stage, and for the Royal Shakespeare Play, National Theatre, and doing TV documentaries such as Suffragette City. And she's also an esteemed author with a couple of bestsellers, if not more than that. So with that, I'd like to welcome her onto the stage with Councillor Apthorpe, the Mayor. So please put your hands together to welcome her this evening.
I was about to do a show. Oh my God, what are they expecting me to do?
Well, with that, I'm going to hand over to yourselves and for your question and answer and audience with Sheila. And then we will come to you later on in the evening to ask some questions as well. And can I ask that everybody please turn off their mobile phones before we start? Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, and hello Sheila again.
Hello.
It's so nice to meet you.
She was late picking me up. They've got this
Blame it on me.
enormous car, this mayor's car, and they picked her up first, half an hour late. So that's the reason you've all been kept waiting. Yes,
That's
Lady
absolutely
Mayor.
right. It's wonderful to be talking about your latest book, Old Rage. And I thought we could start out by me asking you, when I read the book, it seemed like you started out intending to write a book about documenting old age, perhaps how to live it well, and it ends essentially with calling for a political revolution.
Well,
So how did that happen?
Well, exactly like that. I've written some books before that seem to have kind of helped people. I wrote one called The Two of Us, which was about John and I, and there was a lot about addiction and death and all sorts of things. And I got hundreds of letters from people saying that they'd kind of identified with it and it helped them. So my publisher said, look, you seem to be handling old age quite well. Why don't you write a book about old age that's going to cheer everybody up? So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I'll write a sort of lyrical, lovely book with lots of poetry about the beauty of old age. Well, what happened was Brexit, me getting rheumatoid arthritis, my daughter getting cancer, and one after another, all these blows kept coming and hitting me. So it ended up being not exactly a sad book, but a battling book. And also the political situation in this country has become so ludicrous that I had to write about that. So it turned, instead of me saying, it's lovely getting old, you'll be full of contentment and wisdom and loveliness and settling down and not having to work, it isn't that at all. It's a bit of that.
It's really quite the political tour de force. I mean, everything is discussed in there, and a lot seemed to make you quite angry. I was sort of wanted to know where that interest in politics and sense of fighting for what's right, where you think that's come from.
Well, I say in the book, and I think this is absolutely true. Incidentally, I did a book thing recently down in Cornwall, and as you know, Cornwall voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, so I wasn't feeling very comfortable. But anyway, it did, and it was when Boris had done something absolutely ludicrous. So it was an evening of mockery, really bad behaviour on my part. And I got a letter from a woman saying, I thought I was going to be entertained. I wasn't expecting a political rant. So I gave her her money back. I sent her her money back. I did. And then she wrote again and said, well, I shall use it for an animal charity. So I didn't. I gave it to the Labour Party. But anyway, sorry, what was I forgot what you asked me. What did you ask?
You thought that sense of justice and political interest came from.
Well,
good political interest, though, I must say.
To be serious, I think one of the main reasons is that when I was a little girl, it was wartime. I was 90 a couple of weeks ago, so you see how old I am. The war affected me very profoundly, absolutely dreadfully. We were bombed. I lived a lot of time down the area shelter, and then I was evacuated when I was 8 on my own and billeted on people, and that was a nightmare. So terrible, terrible things happened. But then one of the worst things that happened was after the war, when we discovered about the camps. We discovered about Belgium was liberated and places like that. And I remember my dad, who was a very serious bloke, showed me the pictures of this, and there was one particular picture, and I'm going to cry if I'm not careful, but there was one particular picture of a child standing naked on a table with a lot of Nazis, not Germans, Nazis, standing around pointing at and he was one of the children that were used for experiments in the camps. And I remember my dad turning to me and saying, and I was crying obviously because he told me what had happened and I was so shocked, and he said, this must never happen again, and it's down to you. And that down to you has haunted me for the rest of my life. And I think really that's probably what's propelled me, because it is down to you and me and all of us. If we don't like something, it's no good sitting there saying how sad and awful it is. You've got to fight to change it. And my dad was he's a working class man, and he bit of a chancer, but he fought for the right the whole time, and I think that probably started me off, and that down to you thing is stuck in my mind. But also I don't know how you can live in this world without feeling you want to change aspects of it. It's so unfair and so unequal and so shocking and so cruel, a lot of it. Having said that, a lot of it is absolutely beautiful, and some of the people are beautiful. But there are things that have to be righted. And each generation, I mean, I look back on my life, and there was the war. We came out of the war really well with the welfare state and all those miraculous things for people from my background. And that was a grey period while all that was sorted out. Then we had the Irish, we had the Troubles. We've had all these things, and always we come out of them. And I think that's the course of life, isn't it? That terrible things happen. And please God, out of those terrible things comes good. And I do believe that in my heart of hearts. I really, really do believe that happens. But there will always be bad things happening. That's life.
I know as well you're a Quaker, and I think became a Quaker later in life. How do you see being a Quaker, and does that impact any of your political interests?
Yes, it does, very much so, very much so. I went to a convent when I was a little girl, so I know my catechism and my creed and all that, right in my head. I can't get rid of them, and hellfire and all those things. And then I had a father who used to tour churches on Sunday. Deeply embarrassing, because he had a very loud voice and he always sang distants to all the hymns, and you know, and he would give marks out of 10 for the sermon, and I would sit there cringing. But we went to Methodist, Congregational, all that sort of thing, and I did always go to church on Sunday. And then my mum died badly, and my first husband died badly, and I completely lost my faith. I remember standing over my first husband's body and saying, there is no God. And that was the end. I then became an atheist and a humanist. And I went through a period of total disbelief. And then I got cancer, and I felt the need of some kind of spirituality in my life. I felt there was something I needed to look at that I wasn't looking at. And then I discovered the Quakers. And the Quakers have nobody in charge, which is really good for me because I don't like being bossed about. And they change constantly. People think of them as sort of puritanical. They're not in the least. They are the first people that conducted mixed gender marriages. They've been progressive all the way through history. And women have always been equal all the way through history. They have a proud history, the Quakers. And I just feel at home there. And our worship is a week of, every week we have something called Meeting for Worship, which is an hour of silence, unless anybody feels moved to speak. But very often it's just an hour of silence, united silence with people that you trust and love, all of whom are on some kind of spiritual quest. I always think it's amusing that the only book that we have is called Advice and Queries. And you sort of think, we'll give you advice. You don't have to take it, but we'll give you advice. And you can ask a few questions. And that's what Quakers are trying to find. And their religion is experiential. You know, we do it rather than talk about it. Therefore, they are very involved with various things like prisons. And some of the most unpopular people in society are supported by the Quakers. And we are pacifists. Now, having said that, this is one of the most difficult times that I think I've ever faced as a Quaker with Ukraine. I mean, it is diabolical. But having said that, I do think war is futile and ridiculous. Throwing weapons at one another and killing all the people seems to me never to come to an answer. And if you read my book, I argue it rather better than I'm doing now about the rise of fascism in Germany, which was something that, if it had been looked at earlier, could have been prevented, in my opinion. And very often you look at a war and you think, well, why didn't we do something 10 years ago? But it's a complex art. Did you find it interesting what I said?
Did. It was one of the most convincing arguments I think I've read for pacifism within your book. How do you feel now about the situation?
Oh, I feel, like all Quakers, totally perplexed, totally confused, and so shocked and heartbroken at what is going on. And at the latest news, it looks as though China's going to sort it out. And that's what I love, the fact that Chinese bloke's talking to Putin in a way that we seem to have given up diplomacy. We don't do that anymore. We just get bigger and better weapons. But it's a sad time, I think, for society. And all we can do, I think, is try to not have war amongst ourselves. And that's something that Quakers do a lot of, is reconciliation and getting people together who've got problems, and certainly in prisons and things like that, and see if you can find a way through. And 9 times out of 10, you can, surprisingly. Prejudice is quite easily broken down by meeting the people you're prejudiced against.
You begin the book with talking about receiving your DBE and describe feeling sick with inadequacy. and quite horrified. You also then later talk about feeling quite uncomfortable being called a role model. Why?
Oh dear, because I am such a mess. Do you know what I mean? The awful thing that happens when you get to my age, when you turn 90, suddenly people treat you like an old lady. They help you up the curb. Something about that number, 90, that is over into old age. Sorry, what was the question again? Because I'm thinking about that.
Horrified at receiving
Oh
a
yes,
degree.
being an example. That's the other thing. People expect you to be wise. People say to me, they come to me with problems about their love life and say, you've lived a long time, you must know. I don't know the answer. The last thing, I'm the last person you should come to. I haven't a clue what to say. And I feel I let people down. And the thing about being a national treasure, or whatever it is they call you, it just means that you can walk across the stage without falling over. That's all it means. I am not any sort of treasure. I am actually sometimes quite vile. I really am, honestly. And therefore, when people say, oh, you're an example to me, I think, oh, no, don't. It's like things I say. I'm saying things now. And if you say I said that in a week's time, I'll go, did I? I didn't mean that. You know, I'm constantly, even at this great old age, you'd think I'd know something, wouldn't you? But I honestly don't. And therefore, I am really frightened if people are going to use me as any kind of role model, because it's going to lead them into chaos.
Okay, I'll bear that in mind.
Don't do it,
Yeah.
darling. She's doing all right, isn't she? You have to say what a thing. She's the main reason I'm here. I think that's so wonderful.
It's so funny what you're saying, because I was talking to Mum about this earlier. A quote that really made me laugh in the book was that you said, I'm fearful of people who think they know best, because by that point in the book you're given this huge political tour de force, and I thought you probably knew best.
Really? Well, I don't think a lot of people, like the lady in Cornwall, she didn't think I knew best. And she said there were other people in the car park who agreed with her. I love the idea of this, because it did go terribly well. The audience was standing and cheering and everything. And there was obviously this group of ladies going, I thought it was disgraceful. The way she talked about Boris, how could she do that? Well, they don't have to do it with a Cornish accent, but you know. No.
So if you're fearful of people who know best, who think they know best,
Yes, I am.
who do you think should be in politics?
Oh, God. Well, I'd like to see Labour have a go. I really would, because I think they've got a good team. I think I've become very apolitical now in my old age. What I find very lovely about young people is that they are not left and right so much. They're driven by Black Lives Matter, Me Too. Do you know what I mean? They're causes. And I think that's a wonderful way forward. If we could only get into Parliament people who care about the country rather than what their right wing or their left wing is saying, and actually come to decisions because it's good for the country, it would be wonderful. And I'd like to see the end of the Tories, certainly, but I'd like to see the end of all politics, if possible, and try and find some way whereby we do it for the best of the country. Try and really mean what we say and stop lying. That would be good.
Speaking of, you're absolutely right that young people, I do think they're cause-driven.
Do you?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Do you think you are?
Definitely. That's definitely how I got interested in politics, as I started out by getting involved in causes that I cared about, and
Right.
I was led to a party that I felt was more aligned with those causes.
But is the political party important to you, or is it just there? I mean,
I'm not sure as the mayor I should answer.
but it's a difficult one though. But do you know what I mean? When I do think, I'm so sick of, somebody makes a statement and they've been told to say it. It's so difficult to hear a politician actually stand up. About taxes. All of them, including the Labour Party, said they're going to cut taxes. Why doesn't somebody ever make clear that if we pay, and not all people have to pay taxes, but the people that can afford it, pay properly, You wouldn't have to have private schools. You wouldn't have to have private medicine because your national health and your schools would be fantastic. So you'd save money in the long run. But nobody ever, it's always, oh, we're going to cut taxes when we get in. And I think that should stop being a virtue for politicians. I really do. I think we should be honest and say, if we want a good medical system, we've got to pay for it. We really have.
You're absolutely right. And speaking about the young people, which make you so hopeful, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you asked tonight to have someone young interview you, and that's why inexperienced me is sat here.
She was very nervous. She's doing well though.
Do you think we need to inspire more conversation across generations? I've heard you speak a little bit about generational divide, or the myth of generational divide.
Absolutely, we should. I did a film called Edie a little while ago. You do see it, climbing a mountain. And people take away from that it was somebody who made up their mind they were going to do something in their old age, having had a loveless life, caring for a man that she didn't love. But the other lovely thing about that film was it was a relationship between an old woman and a young man who starts off cheating her, and they end up with a profound friendship. And I find that I really, really like young people. Well, some of them I could kick, but no, sometimes. But on the whole, I love conversations with my grandchildren and the schools that I go into. Otherwise you die if you only talk about hip replacements and things. It's so boring. It's just so boring being old. It really is. Anybody 90 or over in the audience? No, there you are, you see. Is there anybody?
86.
Well, that's a baby. I was all right at 86. I climbed the mountain at 86.
I know you just said you're 90. I'll wait for you because in 4 years I'll catch up to you.
All right, all right. I won't be here in 4 years. That'll be the end of it.
Don't say that.
And speaking of Edie, what on earth did you think when they approached you to make the film?
Well, I thought they'd made a mistake. I mean, first of all, I read the script, and it was a lovely script, wonderful script. And I thought, why haven't they gone to Judy or Maggie or one of those lot? And I thought, well, that's very odd because it's such a good part. They'll grab their hands off. But she was supposed to climb a mountain. Anyway, they asked to see me, the producer, and I went to see them. And I was in a fringe thing at the time, playing an old lady, and I thought they maybe saw that and thought I was good, so they did that. But then we had this thing, and I said, well, I'd love to do it, it's a wonderful part, but you'll obviously do the climbing of the mountain with green screens. You know, you can mock it up by making it look as though people are climbing up, or you climb a very low bit, and they were quiet and said, well, actually, we hoped that you'd actually do it. Are they joking? But I was so greedy for the part, I said, well, you're going to have to give me a couple of days to think about it because I don't know whether I can do it. I think I was 85 then. And I do go to the gym, basically. But anyway, I went to the Hogarth, you know, the Hogarth gym, and I said to the bloke in charge, I said, do you think I can climb a mountain in 3 months' time? And he went ashen. And he said, well, I don't know, Sheila. Anyway, he talked to one of the people, and they said, right, if you come into the gym every other day and do weights, and you go to Richmond Park with this bloke who used to be in the RAF, going up and down hills, and there was a sort of little mound that he made me run up. No, faster, faster, you go. And I did it for 3 months. And I went back and said, yes, okay, I'll have a go. And you know, in 3 months, I was so fit. I really was. But then the first bit of filming was across flat ground, and I'm rowing on a lock and all sorts of complicated things. So by the time I got to the actual foot of the mountain, I was exhausted. And I looked up, and the first assistant came to me and said, look, Sheila, this is your last chance because we can't get you off. If you go on the mountain, we can't land a helicopter halfway up. We can get you off when you get to the top because we can land a helicopter on the top, but we can't. So if you want to back out, do it now. So I looked, and already the crew were very young and lovely, were taking the cameras and the sound stuff up the hill. And I thought, I can't now. We've got this far, so I committed to it. And I had this bloke in charge of me, who was a man who's a guide on the mountain. And he had this thing that I had to be constantly fed jelly babies for sugar. And that was my reward if I did something well. He'd give me a jelly baby. There was one terrible moment when, towards the end, I had a very emotional scene with the boy, which was hard. It, you know, takes it out of you a bit, doing scenes like that. And then the mountain was in sort of two bits, and there was a path from here to the back wall, about that wide, with a sheer drop either side, sheer drop. And they wanted me to be filmed going across this thing, and that was the only time that I cried. And I said, I just can't, I can't do it, honestly I can't. And they said, well, you know, you're not going to get to the top if you don't do that. Anyway, my jelly baby man said, right, I'm going to go halfway across, look at my eyes, and you'll get a jelly baby if you get it. And I did, and I got to the other side. And then I had to do it about 3 times, because I had to do close-up. And I was virtually skipping along. You can do anything if you really make up your mind. It's amazing, you really can.
It's an incredible story, and the script. And I remember reading that you said when you sent it, you were pleased to receive it because it didn't involve you dying or going senile. One of the few scripts you might get then that actually included a proper story about someone in later life. What do you think? How do you think we can encourage more filmmaking like that?
I don't know. I think it is getting a bit better, but it is true. Every script I get sent, I either die or go senile, always. But this one was wonderful. In fact, there was one day I remember when we were above the clouds camping, and oh God, why does anybody go camping? Oh, how awful. It's dreadful. Don't do it. But I was in a little tent that was supposed to be insulated, and I had layers and layers and layers of clothes on. And we were camping, and my thing was on a ledge, again with a sheer drop outside, and it went pitch dark, and I wanted to pee. And I had all these clothes on, and I had to get outside and strip myself off, and then get back into the tent again. And then we had a meal later, and because we couldn't have catering, obviously, out there, and they took steak, saying that we could cook it in a barbecue thing. This was above the clouds, barbecue. There was not a scrap of wood. We couldn't light the bloody barbecue. So we sat there eating raw steak, I promise you. And I remember saying to the crew, are you telling me this is fun? Is this, and they were going, yes, great. I said, no, it's dreadful. It's absolutely dreadful, freezing. But I have to say, it did make me worship the sun, because that night when I peed and froze to death, like that, when the sun came up over and it was sort of down below, God, I was on my knees worshipping it. I really was. The thought of light and warmth coming. Because if you do something like that, you do become, I'm a city girl, but you do become incredibly close to nature. I mean, when I was climbing, I was flat against the rock, and the man would tell me where to put me. He tested first to make sure I wasn't going to fall. But I felt that the mountain quite liked me, do you know what I mean? And when I got to the top, people often say, because the view was extraordinary, miles of wilderness. Not a road, not a house, not a person, nothing. And the man told me that, he said, you see that black patch down there? He said, that's been proved by geologists since the beginning of time. That is from the beginning of time, the Big Bang. So it was an extraordinary experience, and I didn't feel at all diminished by it. I felt part of it. It was a wonderful one. And actually, funny enough, that happened to me during lockdown, you know, when we were all isolated and horrid, and I suddenly noticed birds and the river and all sorts of things, because there was nothing else to do. And it is wonderful, nature. I've come to it very late in life, I'm afraid, but I do love having my feet on earth now, rather than concrete.
Because you say that you're uncertain of what your belief in God consists of, but you do have a certain belief in something
Spiritual.
in something spiritual
I
other.
do. I
Are,
could,
are those instances when you feel that?
well, that and listening to music. I'm a classical music freak, and if I listen to Bach or something like that, I do. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to call it God or give it a name really, but just the spirit. There is something else, in my opinion, and I'm looking for it. And maybe when I die, I'll find it. You never know. You know what happens. Maybe I'll find it, but it won't be a man with a beard. It'll be something weird and strange and wonderful, I think.
And both the book and the film made me think a lot about aging, which I have to admit I haven't, at 23 years old, I haven't thought much about.
Of course you haven't.
But I was wondering what you hope someone older and what someone younger would take away from the book, if you were aiming for anything.
Well, one of the things that I really feel strongly about is cherishing the moment, and it's a cliche, but I really do, because so much of life is really hard. I look around at you, and I know all of you have got tough things in your life. Nobody has a perfect life. There are pains, there are illnesses, there are bereavements, there are lack of work, lack of money, there are all sorts of things. But I think it's really important to cherish the good bits. I've not done that enough. I think I mentioned in the book, I remember looking at a picture of John and me on a beach, a pebble beach in Brighton, having a picnic. And it looks idyllic, and I thought, I know that I would have been worried about being too late to pick up the kids from school, or well, I hadn't done the shopping, or what. Do you know, I was worrying about what was going to happen next. And I think the best thing you can do when you're young is to say, and I was Chancellor of a university, and in my speech I used to say, this is a wonderful moment in your lives. There you are with the people you love, and you've achieved something phenomenal getting this degree. And I want you to say out loud, I am happy now. And I think that's a good phrase to have in your hand, so that you mock things. You think, oh gosh, yeah, I was sitting on this chair. I'm actually quite happy now. I'm going to hang on to it. And if you see a flower, don't just go, oh, that's a nice flower, lovely. Really, really look at it. Really look at the colour and smell the smell and cherish everything about it. Do you know what I mean? Look at those flowers and really look at them properly. Dwell on them, so that your whole mind is not thinking, oh, I've got to worry about the next council meeting, or I've got to, have I done that right? Or like being nervous about this. You feel all right now, don't you?
I do. Quite all right now.
Good. Good.
The other thing you speak largely about in the opening of your book is coming from a very different world, perhaps, from many of the people at drama school or in acting or in the world of Shakespeare. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, a really interesting thing happened to me, which I'm writing some extra bits for the paperback of the book, and I've written about this, but the other day, a little while ago, the Today programme asked me to go on, it was the centenary of the BBC, and they said that they'd been looking through the archives and they'd come across some letters from me when I was young. And I thought, well, really? Anyway, they showed me them live on radio, and it was very lucky that I didn't swear dreadfully badly, because they so surprised me. It was the young me. The first one was when I was 16, writing to ask for an audition at the BBC, and it's beautifully written on lined paper, and it's signed yours faithfully, and it's a really proper letter. And then there's several other came along that obviously I was ignored, because I was a working class girl, and that in the theatre that was very rare for people from my background to be in. Even though I went to RADA and I got a scholarship to RADA, and I spent 2 years getting rid of my London accent. And then the letter saying things like, this doesn't mean anything to you, but it's very important to me. Please see me. Even if you hate me, please at least give me a chance. And these a crazy letter. I thought, this girl, I mean, quite bold to write letters like that from her background at that age. And then, sadly, there's a report in the archives of the audition, which I obviously eventually got. and this sums up what it was like class-wise in those days. A voice, it said, rather over-careful. I should bloody well think so after 2 years at RADA, trying to speak properly, you know, because you had to have received pronunciation in those days. You couldn't have an accent. And then there was something called tone, and it said, could pass as educated. Could pass as educated? And then, for acting, they gave me an A. They obviously thought I was good at acting, but might be useful for juvenile character parts. Now, juvenile character parts are maids and servants and things like that. Never occurred to them that a girl from my background who got A for acting could play leads. It just wasn't possible. And it made me realise that in those days, and there's still a class struggle, but there are other struggles going on, gender struggles, colour struggles, all those sort of struggles. And banging on the door and making people look at you, hear you, listen to you, give you a helping hand is so difficult. And once you're trapped in that world, I spent 10 years doing weekly rep, tatty tours, trying, I was stooge to lots of comics, which was very good, Tommy Cooper and Frankie Hudd and people like that, and I learnt a lot. But I couldn't get any decent parts until along came a wonderful woman called Joan Littlewood and the Royal Court, and suddenly the working class story was being told, and people like me could play all sorts of parts. And then I got a part, and there in the archives was my contract for the rag trade. And this girl that had spent 2 years trying to be middle class, beautiful accent, attractive, not too tall, played a working class girl with a Cockney accent who was completely uneducated. So that was a terrible irony. But it was a struggle. It was a struggle. I did a thing recently at the Palladium with some other dames, and some of them, you know, Judy got Ophelia straight from RADA, you know, because they just did, those people from that background. But it was a struggle for a lot of people, as it is for everybody in all sorts of ways. Life is a bit of a struggle, isn't it? Is anybody saying, what the hell's she talking about? Life is wonderful and I enjoy every minute. No? I don't think so. I think we shut up about it most of the time, don't we? I mean, I did a terrible thing. I said to somebody, notice how many times the word emotional is used now. And when the Queen was buried on the telly, I can't tell you how many interviewers would say, I bet you felt really emotional when the hearse went by. When you looked at the cover, did you feel emotional? People, you know, break it, oh, I feel very emotional, I've broken my nail. People feel emotional at the drop of a hat now. And when I was young, it was grin and bear it. It was stiff upper lip. It was, you know, I was waved off by my dad at King's Cross Station to go with a label and a box, not knowing where the hell I was going. I didn't cry. He did. I remember seeing, I can see him now, bending down like that, seeing his child on. But on the whole, it's good to, it's almost fashionable to cry. If you watch now, when you watch television and you watch interviews, you can see the interviewer desperate to make the person they'll interview weep real tears, because that's a good interview. If somebody is brave and doesn't, which I find deeply moving, they think they failed. And that's a funny trend. Do you find that?
Definitely that is. I mean, so you win an interview if you make the interviewee cry, not that I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a wonderful interview with an old lady who played in the bands in one of the camps. You know, they used to force the musicians to play while the prisoners came in and out of the thing from work, dropping down dead in the way. And this interviewer was saying, oh, that must have been really dreadful. And this woman was saying, she didn't say much. But she didn't cry, she was absolutely all right. And then the woman said, the interviewer said, I kid you not, she said, well, maybe you enjoyed it because you're a musician and it was a chance to play your violin. And this woman, I mean, I remember, I couldn't believe, but it was because the woman hadn't gone, oh, it was tragic, and seeing all those people dying, and they forced me to play my cello and all that. She didn't. She was like that. And I think now we're in danger of tipping over. It's great that we can express our feelings in a way that we couldn't, particularly men. Men are allowed to cry now, which they weren't when I was young. But I hope we don't feel we've got to cry. Do you know? I hope we don't feel we've got a duty to cry.
And do you think your sense of that comes at all from having grown up during the war?
I think so, probably, yes. I mean, you know, I'm a good fighter. I learnt to do that during the war. I could beat anybody. I'm a pacifist now. But as a child, I got bashed the hell out of, but I gave it back. You know, but I don't advise that. I really don't. I mean, with my grandchildren, one who was getting bullied, I did explain that sometimes if you reach out to a bully, there's always a reason why they're doing it. And very often you can solve the problem, but I didn't believe that when I was young. I bashed the hell out of them too.
Because in 2016 you gave a very impassioned, maybe emotional speech about the Brexit referendum that went viral, in fact. And in the speech you reminded everyone, which people seem to forget, of what the EU was born out of, which was the war.
Yeah.
Why do you think that gets so forgotten?
It's like the Iraq War. We forget things very quickly, don't we? There's a very good series going on the BBC at the moment about the Iraq War and how it's led to so many other awful things that are happening. I think we forget. I mean, Europe, the unification of Europe was so wonderful. There were going to be no more wars. Churchill was behind it, 100%. And you know, and I think my dad didn't live to see it, but I know he would have been so thrilled. But now it's all falling apart, sadly, because we left. And we did, I think we were an essential part of Europe, because we were sensible. We were a kind of diplomatic centre for Europe, and I think they lack it now, and it's a shame. But something will happen, something new will happen, I hope.
Something you don't really talk about in the book, and considering it's Women's History Month and all, you talk about the effect of your class upon your experience of the acting world a lot, but your gender doesn't really come up. How was it as a woman in that world?
Well, it was pretty limited, let's say. You know, I mean, I got a scholarship to grammar school, but that was like a finishing school in those days, because most people paid. And the opportunities for me were, and I was a very bright girl, and my teachers wanted me to try for something called a state scholarship to go to university. I didn't know what university was. I mean, it's hard to believe that, but we didn't have telly or anything like that. And the only people I knew who'd gone to university were my teachers. And I didn't particularly want to be like them, although I loved them, but I didn't think that was what I wanted to be as a woman. And really the possibilities, even with our grammar school education, was to teach if you went to university, which you very seldom could afford to. Nursing, not being a doctor. Whoa, what? Nursing. I'm typist. Men type now, but men didn't type in those days, so you could be a secretary and do shorthand and typing. And there were very few opportunities, and a few mad people. My sister was already a dancer, so I had seen her at Holborn Empire. And I grew up in pubs. My mum and dad worked in pubs, and they used to do an act at the piano in the pub. So kind of entertainment had entered my life. So I thought, well, that sounds more interesting than any of the other possibilities. And so that's what I did. If I went back again, I wouldn't do that, probably, but I did then. But now, please God, the opportunities are much better for women. Well, look at you. Look at you, darling.
You have 2 daughters as well, right?
3 daughters.
3 daughters.
Yeah. Well, one is a stepdaughter, but she's
How does it feel to see them have such different access to different opportunities?
Well, I'm delighted. I'm absolutely delighted for them. And my grandchildren, I've got 8 grandchildren, and one is a teacher. My eldest grandchild is a teacher. Absolutely. Oh God, are there teachers in the audience? I mean, that's my big passion at the moment. This latest shocking thing that's happened to the woman committing suicide, because there's busters going in and criticising, and nobody. I mean, I am so shocked. All that clapping that went on, I didn't do any of that because I knew that directly the lockdown was over, we were going to say to the nurses, on your bike, we're not giving you any more money. And I just felt that teachers and nurses, why didn't we learn during lockdown that those people are what make us function? And the future of this country depends on our teachers. It really does. Because family backgrounds often have broken down. So teachers are like social workers now in the schools that I go to. And they're doing such a good job, but they are so overworked. And then a couple of men in suits go in and say, oh, their punctuation's not very good. And they get downgraded in the Ofsted report. I mean, we've got to emphasise, I mean, dear Tony Blair did say education, education, education. And I was in Manchester recently, and there were 3 schools that were built during the Blair reign. He did do it. And we've got to do that. Our schools are falling apart. Our state schools are falling down in some areas. Where I go to in Rochdale, the condition of the actual schools are dreadful. So, you know, it's so important. It's so important. It's like music. They're cutting music from the syllabuses completely. And one of my great joys in my life, talking about spirituality, is music. And that's because there was a wonderful woman at the grammar school called Miss Tudor Craig. And she used to have something called music appreciation. And she would tell us about something, in this occasion it was Tchaikovsky. And then she would sit like that, and you saw she had these passion killer knickers. and she would put a record on the thing. And we'd all had supposed to be listening to it, and why it was good. And then one day she put on the overture to Romeo and Juliet by Tchaikovsky. And I was doing my usual, and I went, I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. It blew my mind. And I took my pocket money and I went to the local shop and said, and I made her write down, because obviously I didn't know how to spell Tchaikovsky, and the record, because I was going to buy it. And they didn't have it. And he said, and the man in the shop was very sweet and said, well, look, there's this by Rachmaninoff or something. I said, no, because I didn't believe there could be anything as lovely. And for the rest of my life, I've discovered there is. And now, whenever I have an opportunity, I clamp earphones onto children and I play them a bit of Bach or a bit of Wagner. They love Wagner or something, just to show them what classical music is. Most kids go, oh, classical music. They don't know what it is. They've not been given the chance. And they should be. Every child should have a chance to reject it if necessary, but they should be able to hear it. It's like Shakespeare. When Shakespeare is taught in cut-down versions, that's their heritage. They have a right to hear it properly.
Because you spend a lot of time visiting schools now. How do you find that? And what do you do when you visit schools now?
Well, I was involved with a thing where we were helping children who were falling behind between 9 and 11 with a digital program. But that's collapsed because of lockdown and things like that. So I now just go and visit the schools and do whatever I can. And I chat to the kids and I look at their work and all that and just encourage them. And the thing that I was working on with this digital thing was that they were picking out children that didn't take part or with language problems and things like that. And it ended up with them making a speech, which I helped them with. And I love kids. I love kids. And the future is with our children. And I haven't ever met a child that hasn't got talent of some sort. The thing is to find their specific talent and develop it so that they're proud and can do what they believe they are good at. But at the moment, my grandson is struggling. He's struggling because they have to cope with children from families that have broken down and during lockdown, the myth that everybody had iPads, not true. Another of the Boris lies, not true. So kids were trying to do their lessons on their dad's mobile in the corridor of a council block, you know. So we've got kids who have had about a year without any proper education, and somehow we've got to save them.
This is the third memoir you've written.
Is it?
Yes.
Time I shut up.
Lost count. The first two you wrote documenting your marriage with your husband John Thor, and then later a memoir about your widowhood. Death is really not something we speak about openly, and I was wondering if that was part of the reason you decided to write those memoirs.
No, I didn't really decide to do it. It just, when I was writing about our relationship, John died, so I had to write about that, and I used my diaries. And I think because I told it as it is, and I didn't make it look pretty or lovely. And a lot of people read it and thought, oh God, I haven't dared say that, but that's how I felt. It's like people who are caring. You know, there's nothing more difficult in the world than 24 hours caring for somebody. And it's absolutely legitimate that sometimes you could kill them. You really could, and you need a break. You absolutely need a break. No, it wasn't my intention, but it turned out to be, you know, when I write, I do try to be honest, even if it's not necessarily very nice. I try to be my honest. And so therefore, if I write about death, I write about what it was like, actually, and how I either came through it or didn't, you know. But everybody, I mean, you know, people say to me, you've lost 2 husbands and you've done this, you've done that. I've just lived a normal life. I happen to be in the public eye sometimes, but the life I've lived is the sort of life that everybody lives. It's not exceptional. And everybody gets through it. And everybody finds ways round things. You see, you meet such courage with people with terrible things wrong with them and awful tragedies, and we keep going. The spirit is there. We keep going on.
Why do you think we are so fearful of being honest about that part of life?
Well, because you can, nowadays it's very difficult to be honest, because you can be obliterated by the bloody web, can't you? If you say the wrong thing. And people don't mean it when they say the wrong thing. They just haven't learnt the right word or the current word for things. And so people are very nervous of expressing an opinion. And I think that's disastrous, because we've got to be able to debate and hear other people's voices. You've got, I mean, even the lady that wrote and said she didn't expect a political rant, I would have liked to have met her, quite honestly. I wish she had stood up and said, I didn't expect a political rant. Then I could have engaged with her rather than just giving her money back.
Well, it is live streamed today, so hopefully there'll be no... And to finish, I wouldn't be an interview by the Mayor of Hammersmith and Fulham if I didn't ask you some questions about the borough. So I thought I could ask, when you first came to Hammersmith, and perhaps what some of your favourite things in the borough are?
Oh, I love living in Hammersmith. I love the fact that they had the European flag up long after we'd left Europe. And I love the mixture we got in Hammersmith. It's such a mixture of beautiful river and weird bits and good cafes and funny high streets, and Shepherd's Bush is so colourful and lovely. And I just love this part of London, I really do. And I'm lucky enough to live by the river. And I love the fact that Thames has been flowing there for centuries and is still flowing and coming back again and going out. So yeah, I can't remember when I first came. I lived in Chiswick first of all, and then I moved to Brackenbury Village. That's the estate agency, yeah. Brackenbury Village. And then when John died, I moved again. I've moved a lot in my life, but then that's partly my childhood, because my dad worked in different pubs and hotels, and we moved around with him and lived in the accommodation always.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Hopefully the revolution can start here.
Yeah.
We can take some questions from the floor now if you're happy.
Yeah, there's
that.
one.
Yes. Oh, I think there's a roving microphone.
Oh,
which
just
will-
speak loudly.
It's just racing over to you now.
Thank you. One performance I enjoy of yours, quite eccentric one I think, is in the Wildcats of St Trinian's, where you play the headmistress.
Beast! That's my worst job ever. I hope nobody knows
Oh,
about
sorry. Well, I was going to ask, what's it like working with Frank Launder? He was quite a legendary director. How was that?
I can't remember. I obliterated it in my mind. It's the worst film ever. Try not to look at it. I tell you, can you believe the nerve of me? Alistair Sim played the headmaster and all the other ones. I played the headmistress. And for some reason I decided to do it Dutch. So I went to the Dutch embassy with this crazy, awful script to get the accent. And these poor Dutch people were sort of trying to work out this. I've never dared look at it. But I got a question on that. My PA has a website that people write to me on, and it said, Wildcats of St Trinian's, why? And I said, say the money. But it was a dreadful film. Have you actually seen it?
I've seen it. It's not a great film, but you're very good. You're very good at it. You're very good at it. I just think it's a wonderful performance. It's the best thing about the film.
You're kidding.
It's the highlight of the film.
Oh, I always keep quiet about that. It's the first. You're the first person that's ever remembered. Oh dear.
Anybody else?
Over here.
Is there
One
anything-
here.
Thank you, Sheila, another local. I really appreciate what you shared today. You'll see me swimming past your area when the summer comes, if the river's clean enough. I was going to ask about Edie, because it's a lovely film and I love Scotland, and I was going to ask you if you climbed it, and you told us that you didn't. But it's that moment at the top at the end, I can imagine. So
Yes,
beautiful.
I did climb every inch of it. I really did.
So you already answered that.
And the last lap was pretty scary. It was really
Well, it looked
scary.
it, that
Because
slab.
They couldn't rope me because obviously the camera would have seen it. And, but when I got to the top, I honestly think there's nothing better in the world than achieving something you've been frightened of. And it can be something ever so little. It can be cooking a cake or having somebody round to dinner. But once you've done it, you think, I did it. Do you know what I mean? And gardening, I can't garden, they die if they look at me, flowers. But if I was a gardener, the joy there must be of putting a seed in and seeing the thing come up, and the sense of achievement. And everybody achieves something. There's not a person in the world, there's not a person in this room that hasn't today achieved all sorts of things. So pat yourself on the back. Just getting up for me is...
Just one more question, because you talked about the lady early on down in Cornwall. What is it about older women who are clear-minded and strong in their beliefs and articulate it, that they're told that they're ranting? It's an interesting word that you've articulated it happened to you, but there's something about older women who are free enough and able to articulate what they feel. It's interesting you said that. That's the only reason I ask it. It's quite demeaning, and a woman said it to you, but it's...
Well, I think any woman who speaks up, as do I, and all sorts of people, inevitably is going to offend some people. On the whole, people like women to behave nicely. You know, I mean, I've had said to me, look, why don't you just say it politely? Why do you say, do this, do that, or that's disgraceful, or whatever? You can, but now it's because I'm so old, I haven't got time to be polite. I mean, all that business about, would you mind very much if I say that light is not in the best position? I remember doing a show with Sandy Toksvig once, and it was one of these chatty things. It was at the Orange Tree Theatre, and they'd set up the room so badly, the audience were behind us and all sorts of things. And I sat there thinking, oh my God, this is going to be difficult. And then Sandy stood up and took over and said, right, move that light, put that mic there, do this. And I said, Sandy. And she said, oh, I can't stand all this incompetence. and I know exactly what she means. There are times when you think, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to say, look, that's wrong. You've made a mistake. It's wrong. Do it again. But we don't. We go, I know it's lovely what you've done, but could be better perhaps if you used a different colour blue. It wasn't the blue I chose. Or mix it with some white, or and you think, oh, for God's sake.
Or would anyone like to ask another question?
Can I have that?
Hi there. I'd like to ask, it's obviously of your knowledge of the past when it comes to auditions, is there any things that you think is good and is better? And it's a question I've always wanted to ask an actress is this. When it comes to sex and nudity scenes, have you any veto about, hey, sorry, I'm not doing that?
No, I'm sorry, I'm slightly deaf, so can you repeat that question for me?
Oh, basically, the question I was going to ask is basically, when it comes to auditions,
Yes.
How things have changed, if they've gone from better to worse, and also how much of a veto that actresses in the past and even today have now when it comes to sex and nude scenes, where they have some kind of veto to say, sorry, I'm not doing that. That's not what I signed up for.
Oh right, you mean if you're in a part in a film
Yes.
or something,
Yes.
and somebody asks you to do a sex scene or something like that. Now, thank God, with Me Too, our girls have a right to say no, and all those scenes are now choreographed. When I first started, I remember the first show I did, Amanda Redman was in it, and suddenly it was full-on bed scenes and things like that, and the actresses were beside themselves, and I thought, this is terrible. They're being treated like prostitutes. They're actually professional actors, and it was they had closed sets and things like that, but still, they were revealed in a way that they didn't choose to or didn't train to. But now, thank goodness, that is very strictly controlled now, very strictly controlled, and an actress can actually say, no, I'm not doing that. So that's good.
We've got a question over here.
Yes, Sheila, earlier on you mentioned about the NHS.
Yeah.
33 years ago today, I had a heart bypass
Did you?
in Manchester Royal. And the thing being, as far as I'm concerned, the NHS, to me, saved my life.
Oh, yeah.
I had 5 grafts, and I'm still here today. As I said earlier on, I am now 86, so they did a damn good job.
Yeah, well done. Well done. Well, I think we all have stories like that. I mean, I remember when there was no NHS and we couldn't afford to go to the doctors. We absolutely couldn't afford, and my dad had TB and couldn't get any treatment at all. So, when the NHS happened, it was unbelievable for people from my background. So yeah, but there's a mess now. There really is chaotic mess at the moment. But the doctors are still working away trying to put it right, but they're understaffed, desperately understaffed. I go to the rheumatoid department at Charing Cross, and it's really difficult. They've got hardly any nurses left, and people are just exhausted. But I think the British public care enough. Unfortunately, people are being driven to go private, because if you've got something wrong with you and they say, well, you can have it done in a year and you can possibly afford it, then you can get it done tomorrow. So I don't know how we sort that one out. I really don't. But I think we pay more taxes for a start. Sorry, but that's what it comes down to.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, Sheila, can I ask you a question? I heard that you had an interesting time when you met Clement Attlee in an unusual place.
I met who?
Clement Attlee.
Clement Attlee.
Clement Attlee, oh yes, I did, yeah.
Yeah, could you share that, please?
Yeah, no, it was wonderful actually. I was working in the circus. I've worked everywhere, believe you me. And I'll tell you what I did in the circus. I was an usherette in a sort of skirt with splits up and all that sort of thing, as well as working with the elephants, because one of the elephants took again her trainer, and once you've upset an elephant, they'll get you. They'll squash your toe. So I had to take over from this girl. And the other job I had, there were it was ages ago, obviously, at Olympia, and there were lions. There was a lion act. And they had to go down a runway into where the man did the whips and things. But they'd all had a big meal before they go on, because that's what you do with lions who are going to be on an act. But we had to give them a bit of a prod, so they went, "Wah!" So I was a lion prodder. But anyway, it's true. It's absolutely true. But then one day I was usheretting, which I did before I went on and did my elephant stuff. And a man came in, and I think there was one other person with him. And I said, "Oh, you can go in, it's just the bear act it was, and you can go in." And he's in there, and I'll wait. Anyway, eventually that act finished, and I took her, and it was Clement Attlee. And I just thought, can you imagine Maurice Johnson saying, "No, wait till the bear act is finished, and I'll sneak in the back row"? No. But one of our greatest prime ministers, in my opinion. Great because he chose the most amazing cabinet with Aaron Bevan and Morrison and all those extraordinary people that would they were alive today.
Yes.
Hello. I just wanted to say I've really enjoyed listening to you, tonight, but reading your Old Rage on Audible.
Oh, really?
It's
Right.
wonderful to hear it in your voice.
Ah.
And as a resident of Hammersmith for over 40 years, including school, and having lived on Lower Mall for 10 years and really enjoying that, I felt your love of Hammersmith and the river came across so much. But also, I loved what you said all the way through about Quakerism, and I just wondered what is the best way of starting to explore
Quakerism? Well, to come to a meeting. We've got this wonderful new meeting house in Bradmore Park Road, which is a joy to go to. So just come, 11 o'clock on Sunday.
See you there.
And everybody will tell you that you always get a good welcome from Quakers. So delighted. We make good coffee, and after the silent meeting, there's nobody noisier than Quakers.
Is it me? Yeah. Sheila, I know you said at the start that just because you're a little bit older and at your age that you haven't got all the answers to everything. But obviously your experience from being a lion podder to a mountaineer, you've had a very amazing, varied career. So I'm here tonight with my daughter, and we've got a lovely, amazing young mare. If there was any advice that you could give to these strong, powerful women going forward, what would it be?
Oh dear, be brave, be brave. I honestly wouldn't dare give advice. She could probably give me more advice, honestly.
On TikTok?
Yeah, no. I mean, seriously, one of my grandchildren, Lola, is a very wise soul, and she often advises me. I get my knickers in a twist about something, and she says, "No, listen, Nana, it's quite simple. Do this," and and I would have to know her very well. I'm a good listener. That's the only thing I am, and I think that's what you need to do with your daughter, is to listen and hear what they say. I mean, what do you think, darling? How do you feel about life? What are you going to do?
I just think, you've got so much experience, and these girls going forward, I hope you're okay in using that term, but these lovely young women going forward are going to be our champions. And I think, with all the wealth and knowledge you've got, what could you...
No, they've got to find new ways. It's time we went. Our generation has done a lot of harm. And I think
we're in good hands. I genuinely...
Well, so do I. But they've got to find their own way. They've got to invent something new. They've got to make people care about the things that they care about. I mean, great, we've got them in authority now, which is fantastic. I mean, really important to give young people a voice and shut up, all of us. Shut up.
My mum's here too, perhaps you could tell her to listen.
Yeah. Oh dear, I wouldn't dare. No, your mother is right. Your mother's right.
That's the right advice. Your mother is right.
Yeah, it's terribly difficult. When you're, it's funny the stages you go through as a mother, though. You know, you bring them up as little ones and try and make them behave, and then go off the rails and all that. And then they get married and they have children, and then there comes a stage when, you know, when my lovely daughter got very bad cancer, my instinct is I rush in and try to solve everybody's problems and everything. But she has her own family. So my job now is to sit in the background and to research wigs and find out all the best specialists and just gently hint at those things. But learning to take a back seat as a mother, I think it's really difficult. It's one of the most difficult things I've done because I'm such a loudmouth. And I want to say, no, you're doing that wrong. You know, and particularly because I love my grandchildren and they're pretty good with me, but they misbehave with their parents. And I know that I've got to back off. And I think that's, and your daughter will start telling you.
What?
Yes.
It's not the answer.
What's she going to do? What are you going to do, darling?
Put it at home.
It sounds as though you're going to be all right. I don't think she need worry about you. No, our young people, most of the young people, I worry about the young people who've got caught up in all the modern nonsense that goes on of makeup and drinking, and the idea of a good night out is to get absolutely smashed. And that saddens me. It doesn't shock me, but it just terribly saddens me. Because there's so many other things, particularly in a city like London, that one could be doing. And we don't, do we? I mean, do you go? I don't go to exhibitions and things as much as I should. And every time I do, I'm so thrilled.
I have more done since becoming so much more involved with the council, because I found out how much more is just on the doorstep.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, we are so lucky. I mean, I have to say, with our council, we've got the Riverside, we've got the Bush, and we've got the Lyric. It's amazing. It's amazing for any council to have kept those going. And they are hives of activity, because one of my daughters does drama therapy in one of them, and it's buzz, 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 so much going on. That's what we need to do with our youngsters, to get them together, get the sense of community and supporting one another and loving one another and changing the world. We've got to change the world. It will change. It'll actually burn itself to death soon. It's very scary. It's very scary.
Have you got any other questions? Yes, lots more. Is there a mic somewhere?
Hiya. Yeah, just wanted to ask about when you lost John and that period after, and how you've turned things around to become such a light for the world and to keep that purpose and to keep going. Because I know with some people, when you lose someone, it's terrifically hard. And did you have a moment after that? What was it? Obviously, you released the things with caring for him and things like that. But what was it about your life? What was it that made you suddenly think, you always have to keep going for family, but what was it that gave you that?
I honestly think it's a valid choice to spend the rest of your life in mourning, particularly when you're old. Some people actually choose to live with their memories and hang on to that and sort of think, what would he be doing now, and what would he be, that. But John was younger than me, and I had a year when I was gutted. I mean, just couldn't cope. And then I think after a long, long time, I thought, this is wrong. I'm wasting a life that I am lucky enough to have, which he hasn't got anymore, and should have, because he's younger than me. And I made a decided effort to use my life and to use my loss even. I mean, writing a book about it. And I think everybody deals with loss. Have you lost somebody?
Oh yeah.
Recently?
Not necessarily recently.
No.
My mum lost quite a lot of people, and it's affected her quite a lot.
And it's terrible when you're older, because all your loved people go, and people, you feel as though you're the only person left. I mean, my last good school friend died a little while ago, and it upset me. But I've kept contact with young people always, and I think you should ask your mum to see if the local school could do with her, go and do a bit of reading or something like that, so that she gets back in touch with other people and feels useful. Because there's, you know, the volunteering, there are so many things that you can do to use your time and to get with other people that are very enjoyable and get you out. Nothing is worse, unless you choose. If you choose to stay, supposing you're 80 when somebody dies, you think, I don't want to look around, I actually just want to remember how wonderful my life has been, and just think of him every day or think of her every day. All right, fine, if that works for you. But on the other hand, if you don't, then you have to make a conscious effort to reach out, because people get bored with you. You know, when people say, how are you? For 3 months, they're happy for you to say, oh, I feel dreadful. But after that, they'd rather you said, I'm fine, even if you're not. But at the same time, you're working to make yourself fine. And you can. People have rebuilt their lives marvellously after losing somebody. But it's never the same. I mean, I sit sometimes by the telly just imagining how much nicer it would be with John sending them all up, because he was a very good mimic. And I would be, but I laugh at the thought of what he might have done. Do you know what I mean? So those people never actually are taken away from you completely. They're hovering there. But you've got to force yourself. The first steps are the most difficult, when you actually decide you are going to go out for a drink with your friends, and you are going to go to the cinema, or you, whatever. New things, if possible, that you didn't do with your partner or your child. That's the worst, your child. But I don't think that's very helpful. But if I met your mum, I'd probably be able to understand more where she's coming from. Tell her, I sound as though I'm trying to sell a book, but tell her to get from the library or something, the two of us, yes, or just me, because a lot of people really genuinely have found it helpful. So, you know, it might help.
No, thank you.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah, Sheila. Yeah, great, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing so much of your experience, and all that you've done is just amazing in terms of written 3 books, what you starred in on TV, on stage, on radio, and then your mountain climbing in your 80s. What's left on your list?
Oh, I daren't have a list, because I know time is short. I mean,
there must be something left that you would like to have a go at.
No, honestly, I want to be open to something will come along. That'll be the thing, but I don't want to say I want to do that or I want to do that. And as for all the memories of things that I've done, I've told this story before, but it's absolutely true. You know, Radio 4 Extra, they do some lovely plays in the middle of the night, and I'm a bit of an insomniac, and the other night I listened to a play and got utterly engrossed in it, and at the end it said, Judith was played by Sheila Hancock. Gone. No memory of it. I probably was anxious and worried and all that. Not even remember it. And half of the things, I get people coming up to me saying that I was in that film you did, like that awful film. And I think, and I go, oh yes, but I have no memory of it whatsoever, none at all. I think it's something that actors have, particularly if you've done weekly rep, that you have instant dismissal of the part that you play. I mean, I could no more, the last thing I did was a musical in Chichester. I could no more go on and tell you what the opening lines were than Fly Through the Air Now It's Gone. I could revise it quite quickly, but I couldn't remember, and I had about 3 numbers in it. No idea, don't know what the tune was. It's gone. Gone. My whole life is gone.
Any other questions?
I think we all need a drink, don't we?
Thank you so much. We're so pleased that you're a resident of Hammersmith and Fulham.
Oh, well,
please stay.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, darling.
Can you hear me? Just say thank you so much for coming this evening. It's been really great to have you. We do have some other events throughout the month, throughout what's left of the month, so please do pop along to Lyric or Short Lens. We've got an evening about subjects on Friday. And just another huge big round of applause for Sheila. Thank you. I would just like to say as well, and you'll hate me for doing this, but we've got in Hammersmith and Fulham one of the most amazing leaders of the council. And he's sitting at the back there hiding. Councillor Stephen Coward, who is just fabulous and is a brilliant leader. So thank you. We have plenty of drinks and food left at the back, so please do help yourselves. Thank you.